Hello, welcome back to my kitchen. Today we're going to be making Bakwan Jagung, which I'm almost 100% sure I did not pronounce that right. So I will probably refer to these as Indonesian corn fritters or just corn fritters. It's a Indonesian dish, which if you've never made any Indonesian food before, like I haven't, this is my first time making a recipe. It's a great intro recipe because it is super simple. 3 steps, real quick, big fan. It does involve deep frying, so there's not necessarily difficulty with that, but just like safety concerns of you don't want it to overflow because obviously like fire is a big, not big concern, but like if it happens, then it becomes a big issue. So all I'll say is do not put water on an oil fire. It just spreads the fire around. You want to smother it. You remove the oxygen, or I haven't looked, but I obviously have a kitchen fire extinguisher, so I think it's like $10. And the day that becomes necessary is going to be the best $10 I ever spent. That's always there, ready for me to mess up. I've deep fried a number of times, haven't had any issues, but I do want to kind of make you aware that if you've never deep fried before, there are some difficulties to it of just safety concerns. So like look into that a little bit more than what I'm going to get into here. This recipe is super cool because the actual recipe itself has a ton of information in it. So I highly recommend you read through that. The paragraphs before the like ingredients and actual how-to steps of the recipe are not just one of those like travel blog kind of recipes where it's like, oh, I went to Indonesia once and, you know, yada, 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 whatever life story. And then I found this recipe somehow. It's actual like talking about the culture, talking about what the ingredients in here, like why they use what substitutes for different things, stuff like that. Very informative. So highly recommend if you like to learn things or if you are just new to cooking, great recipe to read through because you will better understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. And then you can apply that to future recipes as you find new stuff. Now, in terms of gluten-free cooking, this recipe is not naturally gluten-free. It does call for like normal flour. However, gluten-free people get a little leg up in here because the recipe calls for normal flour as well as rice flour or like tapioca flour. But gluten-free flours already have that mixed in. So we don't actually need to use multiple flours. We just use our single flour for both. So we will need to do a little bit of math. We need to combine those two numbers, and it is in grams. So hopefully you have a kitchen scale. And if you are making it with gluten, so like with a gluten-containing flour, you will need to buy another flour out there because you probably don't have rice flour or tapioca flour on hand. I can't remember if the recipe says like cornstarch is a viable substitute because that's more likely something that you probably will have. But yeah, welcome to the struggles of gluten-free people having to buy random niche ingredients. And then last but not least, the oil for frying. I'm just going to be using vegetable oil. Obviously, there's different oils that you can use. Just make sure it's something with a smoke point that is higher than, significantly higher than 340 because that's what we're going to be cooking at. So I would say like 400, which is where vegetable oil is at, like probably is the minimum threshold there. Something like olive oil, which is 350, technically is above that limit, but it's way too close for my comfort. I would not be wanting to play that game. So I'd say vegetable oil, or I think it's like vegetable oil, canola oil, and then peanut oil, I think are like in increasing. So I think it's like 450, then 500 is like canola oil and peanut oil. Don't quote me on that. Look that up. I'm just kind of remembering from past times of looking into it. But yeah, just once again, back to that common sense of when you're deep frying, don't just wing it. Actually kind of like look up some things and make sure you're not literally playing with fire. And I guess also just to like be mindful when you're putting in the batter, because we want it to be very cold, it will drop the temperature of the oil. So make sure you're kind of watching the flame amount and like the temperature of the oil, because the more batter you add in, the lower it's going to go. And then it won't cook it correctly if you're not increasing that heat to then get it back up to that 340. But you do need to keep an eye on it because once it gets up to that 340, you want to then lower the heat so it's not going above 340. So that's just the other little tip of keep an eye on the temperature throughout the cooking process. It's not just going to hold itself at 340. It will drop down It may even go above it. So just kind of keep an eye on it. It's not the end of the world, but just eyes on, and you should be good to go. All right, why don't we run through the ingredients and get into cooking? Fresh corn, green onions, shallots, garlic, eggs, salt, white pepper, flour, and celery. The first step is going to be a huge prep step. Effectively, this is the majority of the work. We're going to cut up the corn, the celery, the green onions, the shallots, the garlic, and I believe that's it. Now for the corn, obviously I'm going with fresh corn, and if you're going with frozen or canned, you don't need to do any prep for that beyond draining and patting dry. But don't do what I did because it made a huge mess. So probably go with a mixing bowl and a smaller knife, because if you went with the full-size knife and a mixing bowl, you'll probably hit the sides, and that's not good for your knife. So smaller knife, mixing bowl probably will result in far less of a mess. So learn from my mistakes and don't be silly. Now the next step is just to make the batter that we're going to be frying. So mix all of the ingredients together in a large bowl. So everything that we just prepped, along with like eggs, flour, salt, pepper, and the cold water. I think that's all the ingredients left. And we're going to mix that all up and then pop that in the fridge, because we want to keep the batter nice and cold for it to go into the deep fryer. And now finally, it's time to deep fry. So in my Dutch oven, I'm going to heat about 2 inches of oil to 340 before I'm going to start scooping in portions of that batter that we have in the fridge and cook it for 2 to 3 minutes per side. So after 2 to 3 minutes, flip it over and then cook it another 2 to 3 minutes. And we're going for golden brown all the way around. And also note, keep an eye on the temperature, because as we're adding in cold batter, the overall temp will drop. So crank up the heat a little bit as you're adding it in. Keep an eye on it because you don't want to go over, you don't want to be under. So goal is around 340 for as much as you can. All right, let's give these a taste test. Very hot. I mean, right out the gate, I will say very tasty. But a little peek behind the curtain, I did not actually make these today. I made these 2 days ago. You can actually keep them in the fridge for 3 days, or you can freeze them for significantly longer. The reheating of both of those will be the same. So if you freeze it, just let it thaw first, and then pop in the microwave for just like a few seconds to kind of internally heat it up, and then throw it into a pan to kind of like pan fry it on each side just to kind of get some of the crispiness back. It's obviously going to be a little bit, I want to say like doughy, or like, it's not going to be crispy all the way through like you would get from the first time you deep fried it, which I had some then as well. Very tasty. But yeah, reheating them is not fully at the same caliber, but like it's a solid 90% of the way there. The flavor's all there. However, it is a little dry just on its own. So I would recommend pairing it with something, or like some kind of a sauce, which I do believe the recipe talks about. And I can't remember if it lists anything specific, like what sauces to use or things like that. A little bit of like sweet chili sauce on here, to me, real good. Like it's tasty. I mean, I like sweet chili sauce just in general. However, I do know, this brand doesn't say it, but like I do know that other brands say like Thai sweet chili sauce. And I don't know if there's any kind of like sacrilege of putting that, like these together, but I found it tasty. So that's the beauty of cooking. You can kind of do it whatever way you want. So if there's a sauce that you want to put on this after you've taken a bite, you're like, hey, that's a good idea, give it a go, because that's one of the joys of cooking, is experimentation. Now, there's also, I'm sure, recipes for like specific sauces and things like that out there. I would also recommend giving those a go, because people have figured out what works well together, and then you experiencing that helps you learn flavor combinations and things like that. So I think all of my rambling, most of my rambling was done at the first part. So the fact that you get to this point, proud of you for sticking through that. And hopefully you go make these. They're super simple, super tasty. Just use the oil for something else as well. Don't let it just go to waste, just making one thing. I'm going to be making some Chick-fil-A nuggets as well. I have those brining in the fridge right now, and I'm pretty excited for those. But yeah, that's just a little bit of like the frugal side of me, not wanting things to, like, it's like waste not, want not. That's a big saying that I have in life. But these are really good. I hope you give them a try and, expand that culinary horizon. Or if you've made them before, go make them again. Make something different. See what happens. I believe in you. And on that note, bye, Mom. Still undead. See you.